Good afternoon to all the participants. Thank you so much for visiting us again. I think, as Hewling tells me, this is what the fourth in the series of marketing seminars that Center for Marketing Excellence has put together. And so this is an exciting one. Today, I'm really excited to see Mr. Koh, and I'll introduce him in a minute. Yeah. But thank you so much for participating. This virtual seminar series is actually a huge success. So we have several more planned this month and early next month, and all relating to how COVID has actually transformed the businesses and what are the challenges that that companies are facing. And so today is a very specific one relating to QSR, quick service restaurants. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Koh, who has been associated with QSR brands, some of them very famous that you would know, for a long period of time. And so currently he's the founder of ANDS Franchise Consulting. It's a consulting arm for new franchisees and franchisors. Yeah. Prior to this, he was at Subway. He was the regional director for North Asia for Subway, which is again a huge success story dating back to almost 25 years, starting in the US. And then he has been with Yum! Brands as the CEO of KFC and Pizza Hut. I'm sure some of our favorite restaurants in this part of the world as well. And so he's been associated with SMU, the Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Yeah. And also he's on the advisory network of Bain & Company. So he's got phenomenal experience in this particular sector. And today he's going to share in terms of how QSRs restaurants essentially are handling the epidemic, the pandemic, and hopefully there are lessons to be learned beyond the QSR restaurants. A quick sort of set of things that I want to mention to you as housekeeping chores. One is please put your microphones on mute, so that there's no external noise that could be disturbing us. And second, we would like you to actively participate, though there's not a live one where all of us are together. We are experimenting with this where, as Mr. Koh is talking about concepts and examples and so on, if you have specific questions that you have, go down to the bottom, there is a chat icon. Go there and then actually sort of write down your question, or any comment. And so what we're doing is we're going to break the seminar into small parts, about 15 minutes each. At the end of 15 minutes, or when there's a natural break, Mr. Koh will stop and ask for if they have any questions that he could answer. So at that point in time, I will read out, I'll be moderating the stuff. If there are a couple of questions which are of the similar thing, I'll paraphrase them such that Mr. Koh can answer them. So that's the thing. Every 15 minutes or so, we anticipate a time frame where you could ask the questions, but don't wait until the end of 15 minutes to do that. So if you get questions as you're listening to Mr. Koh, please type them up, and so I'll have a chance to go through that as he's talking. Okay. So without much ado, I just want to invite Mr. Koh. Thank you so much. I know that we have not seen physically until this moment. I have been able to see him and then chat with him before we start the talk. So anyway, so welcome, Mr. Koh. Yeah. So the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof. Reddy. Thank you for the privilege and a very kind introduction. Big thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Welcome to this webinar. Let me just share the screen and start calling up the presentation. Okay, how's that? Is that coming in clear to everyone?
Yep.
Okay, good. So thanks again for joining us. During the session, we're going to take a look at 6 major brands and how they performed during the pandemic, and try and decipher, why some brands are doing better than others. Okay. Just to give you an overview of our session, I will focus on basically the same-store sales growth performance, which is an indication of like-for-like sales growth. So just a point to note that if there were temporary closures during the COVID period, they would have affected the same-store sales performance. Okay, just bear that in mind as we go through the presentation. We'll also take a look at some of the changes in consumer behavior that these brands have noted and how they've responded to them. We'll end off with some key insights and something that you can take away from this session. As Prof. Reddy mentioned, I will stop along the way and we'll have some Q&A, and I like this to be as interactive as possible. So the more questions you have, I think the better, and we all get more out of this session. Okay, moving along now. Before we look at the brands, let me introduce them. You must be kind of curious which brands we are featuring today. So obviously, McDonald's being one of the largest global brands, we'll cover them. Yum Brands, who I've been associated with in the past. 3 brands in their stable: KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell. We'll take a look at Domino's as well, the pizza delivery chain. And finally, Wingstop, which is having a presence here in Asia as well. Right, before we look into the specifics of each of the brands, I think the brands have really responded well to the pandemic. They've had to do certain operational changes to make sure that they have that credibility and that confidence with the consumer in order to do business in what is very uncertain and perhaps anxious times for consumer. Right? So if you look at the 6 brands, what did they do? I think they put safety first, which is of paramount importance. Safety of team members and customers. They've provided a safe and clean environment to do business in. And as well, given convenient and safe access. And some of you who have maybe experienced ordering through some of the brands for delivery and so on, you've probably seen this happening. If you've gone for takeaway, you've probably seen this happening in terms of how the cleaning routine has changed within the restaurant environment. So all this was part and parcel of building trust and confidence. So without trust and confidence during this time, it would be very difficult to persuade customers to basically patronize your brands. Right? So this was one of the top foremost things that you will see that was the focus of the brands during this period. And secondly, because the brands are very clued in with the community, they've actually come back to support the community during these trying times. You hear a lot of what good brands are doing good in the pandemic, helping with the frontline workers, supporting the team members with bonus incentives, even giving to the community, to the needy, and obviously supporting projects that promote equality and inclusivity. Some examples are, McDonald's had a free thank you meal for healthcare workers. Yum launched a huge commitment to promote equity and inclusion. And this is predominantly in the US, but it will also apply globally. And Wingstop put in $1 million into employee fund to help restaurant employees that are in need. So you can see that the brands not only want to do business during these times, but they have basically stood up and provided support for the communities. So let's delve into McDonald's. Right, McDonald's being a global brand, they've basically had seen a greater impact on their international markets. So now, why is that so? Let's take a look. Now, virtually all restaurants in the US remain open for McDonald's. A large chunk of their portfolio included drive-through units. So they had to close dining rooms, but they didn't have to close restaurants. So actually, they remain open for business. And if you look at the international operated markets for McDonald's, in Q2, where the pandemic was at its peak, more than 50% of their restaurants had to close or had some restrictions in terms of doing business. And this impacted big in Europe, as you know, Spain and France, also in the UK were the epicenters, and these markets were hit very, very hard. What other things did they observe? Traffic impact was most pronounced in the CBD area, into malls, transport locations, and tourist locations. So not surprising when you look at what COVID has done to the impact of how people move around cities and towns. In fact, there's no movement. So that has really curtailed the business in these trade areas. Right? And in addition to that, consumption behaviors have changed too. So people not being able to go to restaurants, that's obviously affected the dine-in business. People not going to work basically killed the breakfast segment. Right? And late night, people don't go out parties, they don't go out to cinemas. 24-hour service, is that still needed? So that was a big insight for McDonald's. Right? So what happened to their same-store sales growth? So if you look at the US, which is shown in blue, and the international operated markets, which is shown in red, you see the US perform better than the global international markets. Again, I think it's mainly because of the temporary closures and largely a dependency on dine-in and some of the trade areas that we just mentioned. Right? So traffic moved to off-premise channels. As I mentioned earlier, in the US, they have a majority of assets that operate drive-through service. And they've seen a major shift towards drive-through and delivery. Delivery only accounted for about 10% of the sales in the US. That surprised me a bit. I thought that maybe delivery would be bigger, but I guess with a lot of drive-through assets, the really convenient driving culture probably drives the traffic through more of the drive-through channel. Yeah? And then they've also modified operations quite considerably. So they were very agile. They had to basically, change their long-standing operating models or operating procedures for years and years, which they are so well known of, being an excellent operator in the QSR. So they had to be very agile to modify it to make sure that safety was top of mind, safety was communicated, and safety was shown to all the customers to build their confidence. And that actually resulted in enhanced satisfaction levels. In fact, they reported in the US that they have the highest satisfaction levels from their consumer surveys. So that's a side impact, which basically drove a lot more of operational improvements and adapting to a COVID environment. What was interesting, which they shared in their earnings release, was they conserved marketing budget in Q2. They actually went to a defensive mode. And quite considerably cut marketing spend in the US by about 70%. Whatever's left they spend on promoting drive-through and delivery. And they announced that they will come back in the second half, build up a war chest, and corporate would contribute another $200 million to basically ramp up marketing in the second half. Now, how that has impacted their performance in Q2, we can take a look later when we compare against the other brands. Yeah. And what did they run? They ran a delivery campaign, which was simplified. Again, they simplified some of the menus. I'll talk about that in a later bit. Let's take a quick look at one of their ads here. So let me just replay that because it came up a bit quick. So very catchy message that your home is now a McDonald's, right? Because with McDelivery, you can basically get McDonald's anytime, and they powered this with partnerships with Uber Eats and DoorDash in the US. Okay, so that's an example of a delivery one. Similar campaign did for one that they did for drive-through. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so I don't know if you noticed that they also talked about safety being a priority. They talked about Happy Meal, which is a hope for children. Yeah, so in the lockdown, it's more of a family occasion. So quite catchy, quite simple message for drive-through. And basically, what we've seen is that the July same-store sales growth was slightly positive after Q2 of negative 8.7. Okay. What were some of the change in consumer behaviors that they noticed and they thought that would be enduring, right? Would continue. They call it the 3D future for McDonald's. Basically, staying true to drive-through. I think you'll see that they will be looking at developing more assets with drive-through capabilities. Introducing delivery into the restaurant system and going digital for digital orders, ordering in advance, or digital kiosks, which we're all familiar with here in Singapore. Okay, let's take a look at Yum Brands now, moving along. So Yum Brands is a portfolio of 3 brands. In fact, 4. They have added Habit Burger, which is the latest addition. It's a much smaller brand, but we'll focus on the big 3. So the brand has been impacted globally. So what's been common across the portfolio? Sales has declined mainly because of temporary closures. So at a peak, more than a fifth of their restaurant portfolio were closed. Similar to McDonald's, dine-in, mall, transport locations were hardest hit. And during the course of Q2, there have been a steady reopening of restaurants that kind of mapped a bit of improvement in the results towards the end of Q2. They've also seen significant off-premise growth. So the delivery, carry-out, pick-up, and drive-through channels were doing great. And then, as I said, the improving trend in line with stores opening during the course of Q2. Okay, just a snapshot very quickly of the 3 brands. You'll see that KFC was hardest hit, minus more than 20%. You've got Taco Bell and Pizza Hut around, the minus 7-8% during Q2. We'll delve into this in a bit more detail later as we look at the individual brands. So the common change in behavior across all 3 brands has been digital. I think the one big message you'll hear from this session is that digital has changed the consumer behavior. COVID has accelerated that change. So it's been a big driver for them in Q2. So despite store closures, closing of dining room, restriction in operating hours, they've been able to put sales through the digital channel, which hit a record of $3.5 billion for them across the globe, which is a $1 billion increase within a quarter, which when you think about it, that's really amazing. Right? And this has accelerated the digital transformation. So not only are consumers adopting it, but the brands are quickly pivoting and being agile to upgrade and make sure that their capabilities are world-class. And then in order to fulfill orders, they've been on a program to basically recruit more delivery aggregator partnerships to get the brand to where people are looking for delivery services. KFC, so let's look quickly at KFC specifically. So their same-store sales performance were linked very closely to off-premise capabilities. So significant drive-through and delivery markets fared much better. So markets like Australia, US, and Canada, where they have huge drive-through business, delivery business, they fared better. And the US also benefited from the recent launch of KFC.com for their pickup and delivery off-premise service. And here, having the right product helps. As you think about it, with lockdown, families are in the home together. So really, the big bundles have been playing to KFC's strength. So the family meal occasions gave them a right offer for the right time. In fact, during the COVID period, the US system had the highest average sales per store during a week of May. And you might have heard that they stopped using the tagline "finger licking good." So they're no more finger licking good because you know, in COVID times, it's not good to put your hand close to your mouth. Okay? So how did KFC US perform? So you can see a good bounce here in Q2. You know, with a large drive-through market, they've and the delivery, they've got an off-premise bounce. So they've proven that, you know, despite the COVID situation, they've managed to you know, give a bounce in the positive, probably about +7 or 8, right? And the international markets obviously were still impacted because of the closures and largely, I think, a dependency on dine-in mall locations. Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut is a brand that has multiple channel businesses. So they have a restaurant, a dining channel. They have obviously the delivery channel and a carry-out express units. And not surprisingly, I think they had significant decline in markets where they were heavily dependent on the restaurant business and also express units. However, if you, excuse me, if you pulled out the off-premise segment, actually Pizza Hut as a whole globally for the delivery and carry-out was a positive same-store sales growth in Q2. So I think that clearly shows the shift of consumption going off-premise. Right, and this is something that they launched in China because China went into the COVID situation first, and Yum China actually introduced contactless delivery and pickup. And this is when you have best practices from a global system being adopted in other countries and eventually being adopted by, you know, the whole industry. So the US marketing was primarily driven to meet the consumer needs during COVID, which they identified as value because in these times, job security in question. So I think consumers were watching what they're spending. And also premium bundle meals for family occasions. So they had their usual large pizza offering. But at the same time, they did offer a big box. Let's take a look what the box looks like, yeah? Okay, let me just play that again. So you can see it was a big box, variety, something for everyone in the family. Its value as well, I think it's priced quite competitively. And you can see the closing caption here gives you confidence. You can have contactless delivery and carry out. Okay, so I think, you know, Pizza Hut having an off-premise channel obviously will position well to manage through this pandemic. However, in fact, their largest franchisee wasn't spared. When you look at it, they went into bankruptcy. You might have heard of NPC, 1,200 stores, Pizza Hut in the US. Basically got caught because that burden was huge. And they had a portfolio of outdated dining assets. So that was a big drag on their business. So when we look at the US business versus international, you'll see that both had a bit of a bounce. In fact, the US had a huge bounce in Q2, whereas international had a bit of recovery in Q2 as well. When you dive in deeper, you'll see that the US, if you exclude the impact on express units, the off-premise business was up 21%, which is huge. And then, you know, with the worldwide business, you know, basically having the off-premise channel offset the decline within dine-in, but not enough to recover to positive. Okay, and finally, Taco Bell. Taco Bell is predominantly a US business. More than 90% of its restaurants are in the United States. It was the hardest hit of the three brands within Yum, because 25% of their sales generated from dine-in, as well as late night and breakfast, the 2 day parts that are the worst to have during the pandemic. Right? So they had the most ground to make up compared to KFC, Pizza Hut. So they had to pivot marketing very quickly. Now, traditionally, if you know Taco Bell, it's traditionally an individual consumption brand, right? It's very much the taco, burrito, individually packed. So they had to pivot and start promoting group bundles. So moving away from the norm. Let's take a look at one of their ads, which they ran, a $10 taco and burrito cravings pack.
You hear that? That's the sound of true friendship. Because when you have the $10 taco and burrito cravings pack, there's not much more you need to say. Get it for the friends that get it. Only at Taco Bell.
So again, in the end, you saw that message, available through contactless drive-thru. So they really had to drive awareness of their safety contactless service, as well as the off-premise channel. So in fact, they ran a kind of informational campaign. So just take a look at that. And not just pivot marketing, Taco Bell also focused on operations and lifting their digital capabilities. So having to push business to drive-through, they had to make sure that the drive-through was operating at a good pace. So they focused and put world-class operations into drive-through, improving their speed of service by 18 seconds. And then they leveraged the TacoBell.com app and loyalty program, which obviously took the friction out of ordering and focused people on to the off-premise channel. Okay. So this is the same line that you saw earlier. We've used the worldwide same-store sales number as a proxy for the US same-store sales. And basically, because they had so much ground to catch up, they needed some time to basically reframe what they were offering to get consumers onto the off-premise channel into group meals. And therefore, progress was made in Q2. And it's good to say that the same-store sales has turned positive in July. Okay, we'll take a pause. I know I've been doing a lot of talking in the past, 20 minutes or so. So I'll hand it over to Prof. Reddy to do some Q&A, our first Q&A for this afternoon.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Ko. Yeah, so there are a couple of questions I think that came in during your talk. So I thought they are appropriate as as you just close this segment. One is about the CSR activities that firms are doing or need to do during this pandemic. That's one, yeah. And what that does is obviously it increases the cost, and potentially in a downturn that would actually increase potentially losses.
Right.
So how do firms strike the balance between doing the right thing in terms of the CSR, at the same time maintaining the profitability for their survival, right? So that's the first question. I have another question, which I think I'll field at the moment.
Okay. So I think the capacity to do the community support, I think will vary from brand to brand. I think when you look at the size of your business, I think you have to be practical, right? But I think what we are seeing is that CSR is very much part of the brand these days. It's part of the brand's personality and identity. So it gives the brand purpose. And I think, you know, consumers at the end of the day recognize that and reward the brands for it. So, you know, if you look at a brand that's socially responsible, chances are consumers are more loyal to them, right? Because they're doing the right thing, right? They're concerned about, you know, welfare people, welfare beings, safety of employees, and you know, other social you know, issues. So I think, yeah, make a budget for it. Yeah, spend where your brand feels it's the right thing to support. Be practical. I think that's what I would say. But it is invaluable these days. CSR is becoming part of the brand personality.
Do you see any brands which have done well so far, Mr. Koh? Yeah.
I think if you look at all the major brands, I think they have a good CSR you know, commitment. So some of the examples that I've shown, you know, for Yum, for example, one I'm familiar with, $100 million over 5 years. Obviously, the events in the US have been terrible. You've seen a lot of inequality and injustice. So that's what Yum is trying to, you know, address with that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I have another question. I think here the questioner is essentially asking about increasing competition, particularly he was talking about chicken restaurants from Korea, which is actually becoming more popular. So the question is, how do brands like KFC keep the edge? And do they have they lost market share to the local sort of an emergence of competition?
Right. So competition is, I think, good for the market. It's actually good for the consumer as well, more choice. So if I look broadly at what KFC has done in the past and will continue to do, I suspect the future is to continue to innovate. Innovation is key to keep the brand top of mind. So in terms of innovation of the food, the flavors, but also innovation around how the brand is being accessed, you know, digitally. And you'll see that, you know, in the past few years, KFC has had, you know, the self-ordering kiosks, they have the apps, they've upgraded their online and e-commerce capabilities. So I think innovation is key. As to market share, I think KFC being a big brand holds its space, but obviously they can't be, you know, no brand can afford to be complacent, right? So I think competition is good. It keeps innovation going. It keeps the brand progressing.
Yeah, fantastic. So, oops. Another question for you. The question is, besides obviously the digital sales, what major changes have these food chains done well, are doing it? But yeah, you mentioned in terms of drive-throughs, they modified the stuff and so on.
Right.
And the second part of the question, do you think it is a temporary trend, or is it really a breakthrough?
Okay. Okay, some of the changes which we'll cover in the other brands coming as well. Yeah. But just to give you a sneak peek, I think, you know, changing the operating procedures to make it more convenient for consumers to access. I think that's a big change, and I think that's going to be permanent. Whether it's going to be digital or some form of a new twist to the delivery service, which we'll see in a while. It's I think going to be permanent, because I think that's what consumers are going for, the fact of convenience. Some of the brands, to cope with the pandemic, simplified their menus as well. So I think there's a balance to be struck in terms of how complicated the menu should be versus simplicity, because simplicity allows for gains on speed of service, gains on productivity, as well as food costs. So then that's a balance that needs to be struck.
Okay, very good. So one question which relates to branding, and I think we'll get to the second segment of yours, Mr. Koh. This question deals with branding. So how do these Singapore franchises operate, right? I mean, so what the question is relating to is, do they go to the US headquarters to do any of these branding decisions, or it's bubbling up from from the APAC? So this is always a tug in terms of how the structure is and the reporting and consent and so on. So, but how do the local franchises deal with the headquarters in the US? Or do they have an APAC division which essentially has a little bit more flexibility? Yeah.
So I think it varies from brand to brand. It really depends on the brand philosophy. How much does, let's say, the brand owner in the US perhaps want to control the innovation and some of the advertising messages? Okay? But I think the baseline is obviously being the franchisor, the brand owner. They would have usually the right to approve any advertising or any product that gets on to the market. Okay? And I think that is very much a franchisee-franchisor relationship to ensure there's alignment in terms of understanding the consumer. So I think if you understand the consumer well, knowing what the consumer needs are, then you can then build better understanding, alignment around the execution of how advertising may be presented, food innovation, and the overall branding messaging in that market.
Okay, very good. So thank you so much, Mr. Koh. I have one more question, but I think I'll defer it during the next break, because that's actually a fascinating question about companies essentially associating and starting their own ad agencies. And I mentioned Toyota as an example, but I think that might be a good thing that we can take.
Yeah, sure. We can take that later. Yeah, no problem.
Good. Thank you for the questioner. Yeah, so I think we'll take up that question in detail when we break.
Fantastic.
Okay, continue.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the questions, guys and gals. We keep it coming. So I'm going to cover a couple more brands and have another break to take a few more questions then. Okay. So let me start sharing the screen again. Right. Okay, so we've just finished with Yum Brands. So let's move to Domino's. Okay, Domino's is pretty much an off-premise brand, by and large. Okay, its core competency is in delivery and carry out. Although in international markets, you might come across Domino's with a dining area, a small dining space where people would choose to consume their pizzas on site. But by and large, off-premise is their strength. And like similar to the other brands, safety, convenience, and value was what they focused on during the pandemic. And US on the whole remain open, right? So they don't have a dining room business. So by and large, the US remain open throughout the quarter. Whereas the international markets, due to a combination of forced closures because of the pandemic or temporary closures, restriction in business, at the peak, about 20% of the stores were impacted. So Domino's have great digital capability. If you like, they are seen as one of the leaders in digital. Here's an example of a Domino's tracker, which is, tracks the order process and the progress of when the order is placed to when the pizza is out and delivered to your place. And what's interesting is that they own their own digital and loyalty platform. So they don't engage third-party delivery service providers. And this is mainly in the States. It's a mixture internationally. I think they do leverage on some of the third-party aggregators. But in the States, generally, they do their own. And that's allowed them to be nimble. That's allowed them to act fast, as well as own the data to make sure that they can reach their consumers to drive new business and frequency and loyalty. Yeah? And their US digital sales mix hit 75%, 12 points up pre-pandemic, with a surge in new customers as well. So it was like everything coming together for them, right? Surge in new customers, ticket growth, so the average value of the orders was higher, and also the number of orders, the frequency increased. And at some peaks during Q2, the digital sales mix actually hit 80%. They modified operations as well, so they had well-established, long-standing safety procedures, which they had to modify, and they did it very well. Similar to other brands, contactless delivery, they introduced what they call a pizza pedestal, where it's a pedestal where you could just place your pizza in front of the doorstep of your customer. They also introduced something very novel, simple little tweak to the operating procedure for what would normally be typically a carry-out, right, a takeaway order. But they've turned it into a car-side delivery. Simple tweak, but very effective, very catchy, and it becomes like almost an equivalent of a drive-through, right? So you can drive up to a Domino's and get your pizza delivered to your car without having to spend any capital on establishing a drive-through asset. Right? Let's take a look at how they promoted this, which is quite interesting.
At Domino's, we're delivery experts. So when it comes to carry-out, our team members had a few thoughts on how to make it even safer and more convenient.
Deliver it. Deliver it.
Delivering. Frisbee it.
So we went with what we do best. Delivery to your car. Introducing Domino's Carside Delivery.
Yep, works perfect.
We do the carrying out for you, contact-free, while you conveniently stay in your car.
Thank you.
Just pull up at the store, check in online, and we bring your food to you. Try Domino's Carside Delivery next time you carry out 3-topping pizzas for $7.99 each.
Okay. So that was a great example of an innovation to a service procedure, service process, right? The service experience, and I think that's where you see some of these brands when they do well or they do better than others in the pandemic, is that ability to just understand the consumer, to see weather shifting, and then not being tied to well-established processes, right? And you look at Domino's, it's been around for, I don't know, 50 years, 50, 60 years. And having that agility and a mindset to change, right? To change and change quickly and make it into a competitive advantage. So, wow, not surprising, Domino's performance was phenomenal. And you can see there's no reason for it to go up apart from the pandemic, right? It's been very strong. Positive same-store sales in the US pre-pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, it just went poof, hit the roof. And it's incredible because they've had 37 consecutive quarters of same-store sales in the US. That's more than 9 years. And an international 106 consecutive quarters. And despite being impacted by temporary closures internationally, the off-premise business have basically sustained the brand to maintain its positive performance. So what long-term change in consumer behavior did they see? So what they're saying is that there'll be higher expectations for cleanliness, standards of safety. That's not going away. Adoption of delivery and carry out and digital will accelerate even further. And convenience. So we talked about that in one of the Q&A. Convenience is going to be a big play. And technology is going to enable that. So, you know, when you look at ordering and order fulfillment, it's all migrating to the handhelds. And soon, you know, you have voice activated ordering and also bots that will deliver your pizza, right? And I'm sure you've heard as well, they're testing drone technology as well. So I think watch this space. I think, you know, we're going to see a lot more of technology innovations around how the QSR would serve their customers. Okay, finally, the sixth brand, Wingstop. Now, Wingstop is a bit like Taco Bell. It's predominantly a US-based brand. And they have had minimal store closures in the US. They've closed the dining rooms. And when you think about a brand doing the right things, when the pandemic hit, they closed the dining rooms. And when the restrictions were lifted, they continued to keep the dining rooms closed because, you know, they felt that, you know, they should not promote people together around dining rooms. So dining rooms still closed. International markets, similar to the other brands, were affected. And in this case, affected more than the US market. So the US stayed focused on digital delivery and advertising. So it's interesting when we looked at McDonald's, McDonald's cut back on advertising, right, in Q2, but Wingstop increased the advertising. They have a strong partnership with DoorDash, which is the delivery aggregator. They leveraged their menu and promoted more value bundles and family meals. So the right product for the right location, going back to that message from KFC. They ran a free delivery offer through wingstop.com, right? Maybe counterintuitive. If everyone's going on delivery and willing to pay, why would you run a free delivery offer, right? But I think that's smart because I think that recruited a lot more new customers. And they pivoted marketing. So traditional media channels that they're normally used to, I think they lifted, reviewed, and basically, you know, what were people consuming? What sort of media were they consuming during COVID? Streaming services, gaming, social platforms, and they increased their spend. And I think of all the brands, they are, wow, the best performer. If you look at the same store sales growth, very strong coming in pre-COVID. And then when pandemic hit, shot up to 32%, almost 32%. And that's like, you know, an amazing number that, you know, everyone in the food industry dreams of, right? Amazing. And digital sales pre-COVID was 39% and shot up to almost 64%. So it was interesting because in their earnings release, we could see certain insights of how things shift pre-post-COVID. So let's take a look. The off-premise mix. They used to be 80% off-premise, so delivery and carry out. So they were quite predominantly a off-premise business, which stood them well for these times. And when they closed the dine-in, obviously everything went off-premise. And I think the amazing thing is digital sales also shot through the roof to about 64%. And you know, when you close dine-in and lose 20% of your business, you would have thought that it would be hard to recover. But they did more than that, right? So just to reiterate, the same-store sales was 31.9. It was actually lapping a 12.8. So on a 2-year basis, they were something like 44, right? It's amazing. And then it sustained, and then they reported July same-store sales just shy of 29%. So the carry-out offset the dine-in, and you remember the free delivery offer? Well, that was a big driver. It recruited a lot more new customers, a lot more new transactions. And given its off-premise business and looking at the trends of how delivery and carry out are growing. So specifically with Wingstop, they are in experimenting phase. They're learning through what ghost kitchens could do for them. Right? So they have open about four units globally. Their strategy is that these should complement their more traditional restaurant sites, and it would give them incremental units perhaps in trade areas where they would normally not be able to enter. Right? So delivery is up to about 30% of the sales mix in Q2. It's gone about 2x since the pandemic. They have a goal to hit 100% digital sales. So this is also part of their strategy to to have those kitchens push orders all through the digital channel. And from a financial proposition and economic model, it's far more efficient given its size, which is about 3/4 less than a normal restaurant. Right, so we'll pause here for another Q&A session before we go into a look at some of the other trends within the industry and then wrap up with a summary after this. Stop share and hand it back to
Excellent, Mr. Koh.
Rob.
Yeah.
Ready, yeah.
Yeah. So we have a few more questions. Yeah. So I appreciate the participants to keep them going because this is fantastic. So so one of the questions that that was there before the last break was a question about Toyota essentially setting up their own ad agency with Dentsu. I'm not familiar with this. Maybe you are.
Okay.
Yeah. And the question was, is it possible that McDonald's could do it with Coca-Cola? That's one part of the question. I have a second part I'll come to once.
Okay, so was that more like, could a brand have its own ad agency or?
Yeah, that's what I understood because I think I was confused because McDonald's and Coke have a relationship, but not in an ad agency context. They might joint ads to promote each other. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm assuming that there was some story I think this participant is familiar with where Toyota basically said, I'm going to actually have an agency set up in my own place with Dentsu as the main one. So,
yeah. So I think it really depends on the brand's philosophy again. Some brands would prefer to pitch and not have their own agency because then you get the best, so to say. Because it's very people and creative. Ideas come from people. So I think you might see that companies go along those lines, which are more traditional ways. But I think if a company feels that it has the ability to attract the right talent and build an ad agency arm, if you like, to support the business. Nothing to stop the brand from doing that. I think that there probably be closer understanding of what the brand is, what it stands for. All under the same roof. And I can share that in Yum Brands they have a consumer insights division, which they acquired as an external company and brought it in-house.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Koh. So I'll move on to another question because I think there's a related question I'll come back to because there was another participant who did that. Before we get there, one question relates to kinds of things that companies keep during the pandemic and some which they don't, right? So the example that is cited is McDonald's does not have a 24-hour setup here. And some other companies do it, right? Some other fast food. And so the question was, what does it do when things get right? Yeah, then does McDonald's get penalized, or how do they get to react? But the crux of the question is, how do companies make this decision, what to keep and what not to, right? Yeah. So I think that is the general thrust of this question, I think.
Okay. I think the primary focus has got to be on the concerns of the consumer, right? And how the consumer behaviors are shifting. I think if you take your cue from that, and then take the mindset, there's no sacred cows, so to say, right? So if we have to cut something, we cut it out, right? we may have been investing to build a 24-hour operation, over the past years, but come pandemic and if people are not, going out at night, so drop it. So similar, I think if you take the view of, where the consumer is going, digital, where the consumer is going off-premise, and then be agile to move towards that.
Okay. Very good. A couple of questions, and I think we can move on after that. Yeah. So we have a hard stop at around 12:15, Mr. Ko. So I think hopefully we'll
1:15.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll be able to.
Yeah, we should be able to. I think
participants were given that time, and so I don't want to extend that. So
yes.
I think this question is fascinating. It might actually have to deal with your expertise here. So, and this question essentially asks about trust and confidence, and particularly between franchisor and the franchisees, right? And so, what kind of critical elements of this relationship are important for survival? Okay, so this is an interesting question, but might have different facets to it. But I think it's a very, very relevant question as well. I mean, I don't know if it's relevant in pandemic, but generally I think trust and confidence essentially is needed anywhere. And particularly in tough times, it's even more so, right? So anyways, your thoughts?
No, it's a very good question. Relationships take time to build. Relationships need trust. So, one of the biggest, advantage of a franchisor relationship is the relationship itself. So I think investing time and basically being transparent about expectations of both parties, being very transparent about it upfront, being objective about it, and even sometimes documenting it down, right? Put it on a paper. What are the expectations of a franchisor? What is the expectation of a franchisee in terms of nurturing the brand? So the focus is on the brand, and then building that relationship and aligning the expectations to build a brand. So for example, I think if a franchisor understands that a franchisee has the best interests of the brand at heart, and if that can be demonstrated by the franchisee, that helps a lot, right? And then franchisor has to be also cognizant that franchisee is investing the money. So there should be a understanding that the model should make money. So both parties should realize that, and basically in building the brand to make sure that the economic model works and it works for both parties. So it's very much an investment in time, an investment in understanding and aligning the expectations of both parties up front.
Very good. Yeah. So I think would 15 minutes be sufficient for you to wrap up?
Yes, I think so. I think that'll be perfect. We might have a few minutes for a final Q&A later.
Okay, because I do have a couple of questions still hanging, so I would actually use that to close up the session. So I want you to sort of continue on your theme, and then I have noted down some of the questions that I'll pose at the end of the session.
Okay, fantastic. I'll try and whiz
through all for submitting these wonderful questions, and I think this really makes it much more interesting and lively. Yeah, and picking Mr. Ko's brain about all these. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Great. Okay. Share. Where are we now? We'll go back to. Okay, good. Let me whiz through what will be a kind of a final wrap-up session here. So let's take a look at the 6 brands that we talked about, right? I think we haven't had a chance to look at the relative performance, and here I've mapped them on the US same-store sales growth for Q2. And what has been, basically a lift for the same-store sale, and what basically has been a drag. So in summary, I think you look at, if you're strong in off-premise, you're strong in digital, you have a very good position to build upon, right? And that's been demonstrated by, Wingstop, Domino's. Relevant menu and value. So most of the brands offer that's key. Continue to spend on marketing. So I'm not sure whether, McDonald's is down at 8.7 negative because, has then been an impact of cutting back on marketing? I don't know, it's hard to say. But they've had challenges in terms of their breakfast, late night day part and dine-in business. So that could have been, why, they've been languishing a bit. And trust in the brand is so important. We talked about that earlier in the Q&A, right? I mean, if you have the trust in a brand, you're likely to be more loyal. You're likely to go back to them. Right? What are the various drags? I think the dine-in channel, we mentioned breakfast and late night. Locational aspects was thrown up by the pandemic. Right? Mall, CBD locations, tourist locations, especially transportation hubs. So these were basically very hard to solve, right? Because people are not going there. So that's why pivoting to off-premise would have been, one of the ways to kind of get your business back. What's been happening around the industry? So Taco Bell is redefining the drive-through model, right? Because they've seen that the pandemic has basically changed the way people are ordering. So digital base, order ahead, keep the drive-through line short. So what they're innovating now is that having 2 drive-through lanes. One, if you want to order and pick up, the other one is just for pickup. You have indoor shelves and boxes for digital orders. So if you order on a kiosk, you can then pick it up in a designated box. Curbside pickup, we saw Domino's example of that. So you can just drive up and then someone brings the food to your car. Technology is going to be big in the QSR. So the new kitchen technology, basically, when you get an order for Taco Bell, if it's, tacos, burritos, quesadillas, whatever it is, it will tell you the fastest way to make the order. In which order should you make and assemble that products to fulfill that order. It will also suggest the channel for the customer where it's quicker to come and pick up the product. So if there's a queue in a drive-through pickup, it may suggest that you should do a curbside pickup. And if you go with that suggestion, you get rewarded with more loyalty points. So, innovation around service delivery, leveraging on digital. Cloud kitchens or ghost kitchens we mentioned. Jollibee has seen huge growth in the delivery channel as well. In fact, even pre-COVID, delivery was probably the fastest growing channel for a lot of brands. And they've opened their first cloud kitchen here in Singapore. Right? And their percentage of delivery business has shot up to 45%. And I guess one of the most innovative adaptation is the creation of virtual brands. So no additional locations or kitchens required, just leveraging off existing restaurants. So Brinca Restaurants, which owns Chili's and Maggiano's, which is the Italian restaurant, basically set up a virtual brand, cooking out of its existing restaurants, about 1,000 over stores, locations in the US, and then putting it with DoorDash, a third-party aggregator delivery. And, soon will be a $150 million brand. And it's just, weeks old when this article was written, right? So within weeks or within a short period of a couple of months, quite possibly a $150 brand. So, the thinking around brand creation and delivering that products with that brand, it's all changing. So in summary, firstly, people. Many of these brands put people and safety first. Having that credibility to do business in anxious and uncertain times. And then IT has a huge role to play, not only now but in the future. So the digital capabilities are key, right? To make sure that you have frictionless, easy access, safe access, and it helps you drive loyalty and frequency in the longer term. Having the right product counts a lot, so value, making sure that you have good value and relevant value bundles. And don't forget, invest in marketing. And off-premise is the focus. So think about how consumers are shifting, how they're consuming brand, making it more convenient for them to get the product. And finally, trust. Can't understate this, because trust is the foundation of the relationship between the brand and the consumer. So I think be authentic, doing the right thing, and obviously supporting the community during tough times. So there you have it. I think if you pivot well, you stand a good chance to thrive in these times. Okay. We have time. Let's see how we're doing. Yep, we have a few minutes.
We have a few minutes to take questions. And so I have a few questions pending from the last break, and I think they're all relevant. So let me sort of go through some of them quickly with you. One I think is important. Many of the examples that you cited were all global brands with potentially deep pockets.
Yeah.
And so the question here relates to what are the lessons for SMEs who don't have that deep pockets, and what can they do is the question, right? How can they manage this during this pandemic?
Okay. So yeah, I think that's a very good question. From what I can see is the pivoting to off-premise is so key, right? Because a lot of restaurants have seen traffic drop just because people are not coming, or unfortunately the restaurant may be in a poor location to capture traffic in a pandemic. So getting off-premise, and I think look for cost-effective solutions that will help get your brand off-premise. So nowadays, to develop an app, I think is fairly cost-effective. I think it's not like huge amounts of sums. I think safety in numbers could help as well. So if SMEs came together, shared the costs, maybe create a little app or a marketplace for a few brands to pull together, that could help as well. So I think looking for cost-effective ways to go off-premise.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Another question is actually this is an empirical research-based question, but I think it's an important one that this person has asked. So the person cites that there are 9 branches or franchisees in Singapore for Wingstop, and 4 for Shake Shack, and 1 coming up. The 4th one is coming up in Sunday. So the question is there a magic number of branches that you could have? And let's say, I guess specifically, I think the person is asking about Singapore, but yeah, I mean, this is always a question when you see too many things. Is 9 too many for Wingstop, or is it too few, right? Yeah, so
right.
How do you assess it?
Okay, so it's mainly based on the market development potential. So there are various data points that we look at. Obviously size of population, income demographics, density of the housing areas, and so on in terms of site selection. Looking at existing number of brands that are in the marketplace, the competitive landscape. So I don't think there's a magic number, but most of the time when you're in a chain business, you're looking for scale, right? You're looking for scale. So you'll probably be looking at how to penetrate the market more, how to get more scale, because the common costs are there, right? When you set up a head office, when you set up a supply chain network, when you have IT support, they're all there. So the more distribution points you have that can actually generate revenue and profits, the better it is. So I think in the 2 examples the person's mentioned, I believe the brands are relatively new to the market and are probably looking to scale. They're probably looking to scale. So I don't think Shake Shack will stay at 4. I believe they have opportunities to get more.
Very good. No, sorry. I was asking if the decisions or this analysis is done at the headquarters level at Shake Shack, and say, hey, how many more franchises can we have, or is it done locally? I mean, you probably consult for both sides. So if I want to go and say, hey, please help me, Mr. Kaur, to set up a new Wingstop or a Shake Shack, what would you say? I mean, would you say, hey, I mean, Shake Shack can handle another 10, so it's a good time to get in, or it's already saturated, don't go, right? I mean, so
Okay.
these decisions here, where are they made? They are made locally by consultants like you, or are they made at this headquarters where they say, yeah.
Okay, so as with franchisor relationships, it will have to come both ways. I believe it will come both ways. So, corporate will have a view based on their experience. They will propose something to the franchisee. And usually that discussion happens, when granting the franchise agreement, right? What is the market potential? Maybe, you can't agree on so far ahead, but at least within the next few years, what are the expectations of both parties? Is it to set up 5 restaurants in the first 5 years, or is it 10 restaurants in the first 5 years? So it really depends on the concept, how well the concept scales in terms of mass market, or is it more premium? So its positioning also has to play a lot. But I think to answer your question, it's very much a two-way process in terms of coming to a development agreement.
Very good, yeah. So, and also it gives a perspective in this part of the world. If let's say Singapore is small, but all surrounded, our place is Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia. And so potentially the possibilities are there for much more expansion if, let's say, this particular franchise idea hits pay dirt, so to speak. So they're across.
Yes, yeah. And it would be, advantageous in some cases if, you have a very capable franchisee that runs Singapore, that if that franchisee feels that there's huge potential in some of these larger markets you've mentioned, that perhaps they should start discussion about could they be a franchisee in those markets.
Very good. Okay, one last question I think before we break, and before I do this, Huling has sent me a query. It's not a question for Mr. Ko, but for all of you guys. She'll send. We want your feedback from all of you who participated today, so that we can keep improving how we actually manage this process. So I think she'll provide you a link, so that I would appreciate if you can provide the feedback.
Yeah, I will put up a QR code right at the end too. So just before we leave, I'll just put it in. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And one last question, which deals with, obviously, COVID will be there for a while, but it will ultimately go away. What are the issues in regards to post-COVID? So because you've talked about a lot, technology, delivery systems, customer behavior has actually changed during this 8 months. And what do you expect going forward? And so there was a very specific question in terms of expectations. What percentage of a QSR will now be in-store delivery and takeaway? So, because I mean, the system has changed, right? So in terms of what do you think would be a steady state post-COVID, and how do firms have to deal with it in terms of how do they put the resources?
Right. So that's kind of a crystal ball type question. So I'll get,
that's why you're here.
I think in terms of the off-premise consumption, it's obviously shot up a lot during COVID. I believe that when restrictions are listed, we are being social human beings. We want to get out, right? We want to get out. So I think the dine-in will come back. I believe the off-premise will settle probably at a higher level, but not at its peak of the COVID pandemic, but at a higher level relative to pre-COVID. So I believe that the off-premise will continue to grow. And then we'll see it shifting, and the dine-in will probably be perhaps either a more functional experience that people can just go in, have a quick meal, or a special experience, right? So it has to be distinguished from an off-premise occasion.
Yeah. No, fantastic, because I think we will see some change in behavior, and we'll adopt. Oh, it was easy; we could get a large meal at home with all our friends and so on. Sometimes it might be a special occasion that you can do it. But anyways, I think our behavior has changed, and so we'll have to just see how how permanent that is.
Yeah. I could be totally wrong. I think the important thing is for us to put a pulse on the consumer, and then when this thing lifts, let's see what happens. And then those that respond quicker, will obviously have a better chance.
And I think that is one of the critical points in terms of whatever happens. I think the firm should be nimble enough to be able to sort of adapt, right? I mean, so that means allocating resources differently. If it's less dine-in, then what resource do we need to put for serving staff and things like that? And how do you shift it to off premises? So anyway, so it's fascinating, Mr. Ko. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk.
Not at all. Thank you for the privilege. And I think, well, when the pandemic's over, I think you'll see a lot of celebratory promotions, I think.
Of course.
To get people back. So we all should celebrate together. Yeah.
I want to thank, while Mr. Ko put the QR code up, so I want to thank the participants. Yeah, so this has been extremely great to me to see so many questions and queries coming in. So we hope we'll use this model going forward to attract a lot more questions, and that makes engagement much more fruitful for both the speaker and all of us. Yeah. And thank you all for participating today, and thank you so much, Mr. Ko, again for doing this for us. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Reddy. Thank you for everyone for joining in. Thank you for the questions. I think I hope everyone's found some insights and learnings that they can take with them from the session today. So thanks again for this privilege.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll put up their QR code now. So don't everyone go away.
Okay.
We'll love your feedback.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just putting a nice round of applause. Yeah.